What's up, guys? Welcome back to Machines Inc. And today is going to be a pretty fun episode because we are finally starting the roll cage on this Jeep Cherokee. Doing this roll cage, I'm super excited for, but also pretty nervous. I'm excited to finally get this done, and it's going to be a super fun project, but nervous just because tubing is expensive, and I don't really want to mess any of it up. So just going to take my time, make sure I get all my angles correct, and we're going to try to get this cage as tight to the body as possible. Now, the style of cage I'm going to be doing is a hybrid cage. So you generally have either internal cages or exo cages. This cage is going to be both external and internal on the body. Full exo cages, you theoretically can't create a proper cage being a full exo cage because there's nowhere for the tubes to cross through the body and provide rigidity left to right on the cage. But I don't want to do a full internal cage just because the body of this XJ is really small. And I'm pretty tall, I'm about 6'4", so I need as much headroom in the top of the Jeep as I can get. So I'm going to set up a very common style of cage on these Jeeps. ExoFab makes a kit that you can purchase to weld one of these up yourself, and essentially I'm going to really just kind of copy their setup. Behind the driver's seat on the main B-pillar, that's going to have essentially a halo with an X and a harness bar on it. The rear is essentially going to be a copy of that. And the front is just going to be two A-pillar portions that run up. And I'm going to do a continuous A-pillar that goes all the way up and all the way back. And that's going to be the most complicated bend because it's a compound bend and there's going to be two different angles on that one. Now, theoretically speaking for this cage, normally for the windshield portion, you would want a windshield bar and the V-notch there. I'm not going to put that in for a couple of reasons. One, this thing's not going super fast. I mean, this cage is really going to be designed just for low-speed rollovers. If I was racing or, doing a lot more high-speed stuff, I think that some more tube work on here could be a lot more important. But like I said, I'm just trying to build a basic structure, so if I flop this thing over on the trail, it's not going to crumple in the roof on this thing. Now, and also for this cage, I'm using all 1 3/4 inch tube by 120 wall, which is very standard. A lot of the stuff on here, I'm trying to go off kind of like the basic Ultra 4 spec. You can read through their rule book and see all the rules for building a cage for Ultra 4. I'm not saying this is going to be totally to spec for that, but just going off of basic ideas as far as where your node should be, where landing points on the body should be, how many points the cage should tie into the body, and also that's where I got the size of tubing based off the weight of the vehicle. It says what size, diameter, and thickness tubing you'll need. But I do want to go through and build this as proper as possible, so it's as safe as possible. And yeah, it might not be the most unique, but we're going to have a cage, we're going to be safe, and that's all I really care about. So let's get started with the longest tube, and hope I don't fuck this up. Oh, you fucking idiot. So I totally just wrecked my bender and it was absolutely my fault. But essentially there's a pin that goes in here and it holds these wheels still so you can change the dies out. And I put it in there when I'm not using the bender. I've always thought that I might forget it in there one day. And today I forgot it in there. So I started a bend tube and essentially it just completely deformed the main die wheels, which is a super bummer. At first I thought I was gonna have to get new ones, but I actually pulled them off, beat them on the ground for a little while with a big hammer, kind of formed them over the workbench, and I got them straight enough to work again. So at least I was able to get back on doing some bending, and yeah, it is what it is. Now, as far as the tubes, I didn't really film a lot of that, getting it going, mostly because it started raining and I had to pull the Jeep back inside, but we got both the A-pillars pretty much done, so I'll show you guys that. So we got both the A-pillars set up. I'm really happy with how tight they are, and they follow the body lines pretty much perfectly. This one isn't actually tacked on yet. It's still loose, so it's not sitting perfect, but we got both sides done. Now, there's a slight curve in the roof, so you can see about right there, it starts to dip down. The other tube, I tried to put like a 2-degree bend in it, and I actually messed it up. So I cut it off, and I cut this one off too. But what I'm going to do is the B-pillar portion of the cage is going to come up right here. Once I figure out where that lands, I am going to cut this tube. I'm going to put a slug in it and sleeve it to properly extend it all the way out the back, and put a minor bend in the tube so it follows the roof line perfectly. I didn't want to do a slug on these, but I'm going to do a proper slug, so I mean theoretically it would still pass tech, and I'm going to make it to where the cross portion comes and lands, so not only where there'll be a slug, but there'll be another tube landing on where those two meet, and that should be plenty strong for this A-pillar section. But I did want to make sure there was no slugs or breaks in this area, because that's a very important tube. Especially since I'm not doing a windshield bar across. So anyways, that's some good progress for tonight. I'm going to go ahead and call it, and we will start back up tomorrow afternoon. But I'm happy with the progress so far, and at least we're getting somewhere. Alright, so we're back in the garage. It's a new day. I've got a few more tubes fitted up, but honestly, it's gotten to the point where I need a second pair of hands. Just holding these tubes and eyeballing them is super hard by yourself, so I employed a new shop hand. We got Kaylee out here. So she's cheap, she only is working for beer, and she's not bad to look at, so I'm pretty happy about it. But yeah, so what we're going to do is these A-pillar tubes here, I'm going to go ahead and get these tacked onto these tube clamps so it'll hold them in the correct orientation up. But I'm going to have Kaylee kind of help me hold this in place while I tack it up, and we're going to put her to work. Yeah. Yeah, so Kaylee, what you think? You ready to roll this thing once we get a cage in it?
No. Jake's pooping. So, I'm just hanging.
What do you think about your handiwork?
Mine?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, do you see I welded really nice?
Yeah?
Yeah.
What settings did you put the welder on?
It's my first time. 5. Does it show the setting on here?
So close.
Wait, was it letters? 8? Is that the setting?
You tell me, Master Welder. What'd you do?
8.
Working girl, how does it feel to be in the trades?
As a woman in STEM.
What's STEM?
Oh, you don't know like a it's like science, technology, engineering, and math.
Oh, okay.
It's like STEM, like if you're
Yeah.
like an engineer, you know.
Yeah. You
So
know.
as a woman in STEM, you know.
Science, technology, engineering, shitty welding, you know. So I've made some huge progress on this cage over the last couple weeks. I have not done a great job of filming it because it's just been a lot of late nights out here and trying to really focus, pay attention, and knock some work out. But we've gotten a lot done, and I'm excited to show you guys where we're at this very point. So let me grab the camera, I'll give you a little walk around and kind of run you through where we're at right now. But biggest thing is the interior of the Jeep is done. So pretty happy about that. Still need to go through and obviously install the interior trim. But as far as all of the welding, painting, grinding, cutting, everything inside there is finally all set. So let me grab the camera, give you a little walk around, and show you what we got done. All right, so let's start from the bottom and work our way up. So first off, we have my old rock sliders here that we cut the rocker panels out, welded those sliders into place, and then welded some outriggers that directly support this slider down into my frame, which has frame stiffeners on it. Now, if you guys are interested in some more details on getting these rock sliders welded into the body, my last video has some more details on that, and I will drop that down in the description below. Also, if you guys are interested in the frame stiffeners that I have on here, I have a video about installing those, and I'll drop those down in the description as well. But moving forward, these did all get painted with Pour 15. There was a little bit of rust issues on the floor, so we did some new floor pans, and there was a few areas that weren't necessarily worth cutting out, but I wanted to put a rust preventative coating on there to encapsulate that rust, seal it up, and not have any future issues. This is my first time using Pour 15 on a little bit larger project. It rolls on super nice. You can roll it, brush it, or spray it. I just brushed all this on with a paintbrush. Got underneath the car, got the underside of those floor pans, got all the interior portions that were either bare metal or a little bit rusty metal inside the Jeep. And I think it turned out great. And I've definitely heard from a lot of people that this stuff holds up really well to some abuse. Even just messing with it, it's only been painted for about 15 hours now, and I can't, dig a fingernail into it. I've smashed it with like a screwdriver, kind of tapping on it, and can't seem to damage it. So hopefully for the rock sliders, I know eventually they're gonna get scratched up, but hopefully this will be a pretty durable paint for those in the meantime. Now, moving on to the inside of the Jeep, you guys did see me put these floor plans in previously, and again, I'll drop a link to that below, and I'll just go ahead and drop links to all the videos that kind of are involved in this roll cage video. But we got some floor pans in there, made those out of 16 gauge steel, did put some seam sealer around the outside along all those welds, just to make sure if there's any small pinholes, those are totally sealed up. And then while I had the Pour 15 out and was doing these sliders, I went ahead and did the new floor pans and then any small areas inside the cab that had a little bit of rust issues. Now, Pour 15 does adhere directly to rust, so any areas that did have a little rust patch or were a little crusty, you can paint right over that, no problem. But if you are going to be doing bare, clean metal, they have a stuff called metal prep that you need to put on there first, and it kind of etches into the metal to allow that Pour 15 to stick. So I went through, hit it all with the surface prep, painted the Pour 15, and again, really happy with how the finish came out. All of this is going to be covered by carpet anyways, but just want to seal it up so it's waterproof, watertight, and not going to have any rust issues in the future. So now, moving on to the fun stuff, the interior of the cage is all set up, welded in, and let's go ahead and take a look at that as well. So here from the outside, we can see the B-pillar portion of the cage. This is a main kind of like X setup that's going to go behind the driver and passenger. Now, this is not only going to provide rigidity for the chassis if you were to roll over for it to crumple down, but having this X pattern is going to provide side-to-side rigidity. So if I come and land really hard on the side of the cage, hopefully it won't push over. But you can see it's pretty far back here, kind of rendering the rear seats useless. I'd already pulled the rear seats out of this Jeep a while ago, but since I am so tall and I need to have the seat so much further back, this seat actually sits right up against this harness bar, and this is about the closest forward I could get it. Now, there are some bins up in the top of the cage. Again, I wanted to follow the Ultra 4 spec rulebook as far as how close tubes can be to your head. So the rulebook states no tube can be within 3 inches of the driver's helmet within. All of these tubes, I set them up to where I have about 6 inches from my head to any of the tubes, even with my head leaned all the way back in the seat, which it generally is not going to be like that regular driving. So This technically does pass spec for all the tubes being far enough away from my head, but later on I also will go back in here and add some roll cage padding to all the areas that are anywhere close to my head. So the cage goes up and bolts through the roof up top there, and then it comes down and it lands where the slider outrigger comes through the floor. So it lands directly to that, which is tied into the frame. I did go over, after this was welded, go through and put seam sealer around all that as well. So it does cover up some of the welds. I'm not sure if that would pass spec, but I know it's fine, and I'm not racing this thing, so it's good enough for now. The coating on here, I did use Rust-Oleum hammered brush on paint, and I'm really happy with how the finish came out. However, it takes forever to dry. It's been a few days since I've painted it, and still you can get a fingernail nick in it. So I'm hoping, I've seen some people talk about it can take up to a week for it to dry totally. So fingers crossed that'll dry up, but the finish came out great. This is the black color, but it actually looks like gunmetal gray, so I'm pretty excited with that. Then moving on to the rear, you can see I painted most all the trunk with the Pour 15 just because there were a few more rust issues back here. And then for the rear, I just did a basic H pattern on this rear tube. I didn't do a full X just because I didn't think that all that tube work was necessary. I definitely wanted to protect the driver and passenger as much as possible, but back here, I think this will be plenty strong for a light flop over, and it still gives me a lot of room to be able to put cargo underneath and stack stuff on top, strap stuff to the cage. But yeah, it's not too complicated back here. It doesn't take up too much space. So overall, I'm really happy with how everything's turning out so far. Like I mentioned, interior is totally done, minus just installing the trim pieces in there. And the top, I have pretty much all tacked together, but I still need to pull it on and off a few times to weld a few areas, reinstall it to check a few things, so we've got a little bit of work left on that. But you guys won't see that until the next episode. So this is going to be a two-part series. Portion 1 is just going to be all the interior stuff that I just showed you guys. And then portion 2, I'll show you guys at the top, the finished product of how we got that all set up. And hopefully starting to slam in all this interior back in here, because I am ready to be done with this and out on the trails. This was a huge project, but I'm really making some good progress, and I'm happy with how far we're getting. Appreciate you guys following along for another episode in the garage. If you do want to see part 2 of this cage build and see what that top looks like, definitely subscribe to the channel. Give it a thumbs up if you guys are enjoying watching along with this Jeep build. And if you have any questions, as always, drop it down below in the comments. Happy to answer anything and help you guys out with your Jeep builds. Thanks for watching Machines Inc. I'm Jake, and we'll see you next week with some more roll cage content.